So welcome back. This is the latest video about my learning to fly, my second lesson. So in this case it's number 4 in the Air Pilot's Manual number 1 flying training, the effects of controls. Okay, so welcome back. I'm really excited about the progress I'm making with the flying. Got some really good feedback from my instructor. So this lesson is quite a packed lesson. It's around the primary and secondary effects of the controls. So the correct operation of the controls, how the aircraft responds, what the speed of the air and the slipstream effect, the way the air passes over the body of the aircraft, how that affects the way that it handles. So again, similar to the last lesson, we spent about 3/4 of an hour in the briefing room beforehand talking about what we were going to do in the flight. So the first thing we spoke about was the throttle. So the throttle is on the P38 is what's called a non-linear throttle. So that means that for the first 2/3 of the throttle, that's 98% of the acceleration, and then for the last third you only get about 2%, so it doesn't really accelerate significantly. So you just need to be aware that it will accelerate, the revs will increase very fast in the first part of the throttle travel, and you must not over rev the engine or increase the throttle too fast. So from idle to full throttle, 1, 2, 3, just make sure that it's steady in the increase. The two other things to remember about the throttle is that there's only one time that it's actually idling when it's on the ground, and that's in the course of the checklist. So you want to be, whenever you're standing idling, you want to be about 1200 revs per minute in the PA38, again to protect the health of the engine. In the pre-brief we also spoke about the carburetor heat. So why is it necessary? So in short, the carburetor drags in air for the engine. It takes it through a narrow inlet valve, and as the air narrows, the pressure increases. Frankly, it just cools. And so every quarter of an hour, every 15 minutes or so in flight, we need to apply the carburetor heat just to make sure that the engine responds and that there is no icing. And icing can occur at quite highish temperatures. It doesn't have to be really low minus figures. And then the other thing we talked about, and we talked about in the checklist, was the internal cabin air. So the checklist requires you to make sure the air vents are closed. That's really important because the hot air is drawn over the engine. So in the unlikely event when you start that the engine has a fuel leak, so it catches fire, then smoke and flame could be drawn into the cockpit, which would not be good. So it's really important that the air vents, both of them, are closed before you start the engine. So we also had a conversation in the debrief about the flaps, when the flaps can be safely deployed. So the first question is limitation. So what is the speed at which you can safely deploy the flaps? So on the speedometer there are some rings, some coloured rings. So the green arc is the arc within which the aircraft will fly, and the arc within which the aircraft is in acceptable stable speed. There is then a yellow arc, a yellow section of the arc, which is when the speed is becoming too fast, and there's a red line beyond which the maximum speed of the aircraft you should not go. In the early part of the arc there is a white arc, and once in the white arc, so once the speed is low enough to be in the white arc, then you're in the air where you can then deploy flaps, first or second stage flaps. So the first question is limitations. So you must check the speed, apply a stage of flaps at a time, operation, and then you must check the actual flaps have worked. So indication, so check the wings, make sure the flaps have deployed before you apply the next stage of flaps. And each time before you apply the next stage, you must then check still, because you might have speeded up, particularly if the aircraft is starting to descend. Limitations: are you still within the speed of the flaps? Do you need to make an adjustment? So I haven't actually got a video again of this flight, but I have I've bought a GoPro Max camera, and I've just been testing that today. So for future flights, I should be able to get some quite decent video of me flying the aircraft. I've got a couple of videos here about the actual flight school. So here's the flight school, and it's got a great cafe, imaginatively named Chocks Away, with an outside area where you can eat. Harden is the Airbus factory airport, so it has the big beluga planes that take the wings out to the assembly lines across Europe, so they're quite intriguing to watch. And here are the aircraft. So I'm filming from the land side of the fence because I'm still waiting for my airside pass, and as I say, we'll be flying a PA-38 Piper Tomahawk on all of these lessons. So what I thought I'd do in this video is just replay some of the things that we did in the flight on the simulator, and just talk through how and what that effect had on the aircraft, and also talk through what differences there were in the simulator to how the aircraft reacted in real life. The biggest thing for me in trimming the aircraft is the trim reel is really tough. So it's you must be able to move with 2 fingers, but in this lesson there were some quite extreme sessions where trimming was required from one side of the trim wheel to the other. The instructor moved it way out of trim, and that meant that it was quite hard work. In fact, I had a little worn area, sag on my finger, the back of my finger, where I'd caught it on the bottom of the cockpit whilst I was trimming. And that'll be the last time, I think, from what I understand, that I'll need to trim quite so to such extremes. But that was again a big difference to the simulator, because there's nothing like that in the sim. There's no resistance at all in the trim wheel. The biggest thing was the looking outside and watching in the controlled airspace, because again I get quite focused on the instruments when flying the simulator, and the instructor was really clear that, you know, that should be outside most of the time, watching for traffic, and then a quick glance inside. And we do more of that in lesson 3, so I'll come back to that in the next video. So I did all of the pre-flight checks this time, working through the checklist, checking the instruments, the ammeter, the fuel levels and what have you, and then I taxied out. Again, the big difference, as I've said before, I have to move my feet physically to use the brakes, which you don't have to do on the simulator. And then coming up to just short of the runway, we did the pre-takeoff checks. A big one is the run-up to just accelerate up to around 1,800 with the brakes on, and check the magnetos are working, that you get the appropriate RPM drop from the engine. And a really important thing here is to change to a different fuel tank. If you used fuel, don't forget, in the taxiing, and this gives you 2 bits of confidence. One, you know the second tank is working and it's not going to give up in the air, and 2, it's going to be fuller. So takeoff, and you can see it's a really good rendition of Harden Airport on Microsoft Flight Simulator. Pull back at 60 knots and we're airborne. So again, going through the work cycles, some quite extreme trimming, setting a particular revs per minute with the instructor covering up the rev counter to get a feel for the sound of the engine, moving off the datum attitude, so where we should have 4 fingers between the dashboard and the horizon, and then having to hold that. So fly first, stabilize, and then retrim, some quite extreme trimming. And we went through that cycle a few times at different speeds to feel how the aircraft responded and reacted, just changing and moving back to the datum attitude. And once back over the estuary again, slowed down to within the white arc and practiced adding the first stage, so limitation, operation, indication of flaps, and the second stage, and then setting up for landing 1800, this time around 8 fingers between the dashboard and the horizon, and that puts you in a stable position to return back to the airport. So here we are coming back towards Harden. We need to be just to the left hand side of the river as we turn for the approach. 8 fingers below the horizon, 1800 or thereabouts. A slow right hand descending turn into the runway. I think I was a little bit better aligned in real life than this representation. Well, Microsoft Flight Simulator has got a really great representation with this add-on of Harden Airport. It is exactly like it is in real life. It's amazing. And coming down lined up with the runway, just holding the trimmed attitude. It did seem a bit steeper than I'm used to on the simulator. This is my first landing. I did remember thinking coming down there's no escape key as there is in the simulator, and I do think it was a little bit harder than I would like. I was quite hard on myself, but any landing you walk away from is a good one. And then I taxied back to the parking area. Again, this is exactly like the area is in real life. And we saw the videos earlier outside the Chocks Away Cafe. Really enjoyed that flight. So that's all I've got for you in this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, like it. If you want to see more of these videos, subscribe and leave any comments. I love to hear from you, and I shall respond to any comments that you leave, and I'll catch you next time.